Welcome to the Making Money in Multifamily show, where we discuss everything to do with multifamily real estate investing. We believe it's the best way to gain financial freedom and build lasting wealth. This is where you'll find the best information and practices to help you succeed in your real estate business, whether you're already experienced or just starting out. Here's your host, Dave Morja.
Hello, listener, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dave Morja, and with me today is Pasha Esfandiary. Pasha, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dave. I appreciate it, bud.
Yeah, really looking forward to this one, and just wanted to let the listener know a little bit more about you before we kick it off, Pasha. Pasha started his investing career in 2011, started flipping homes, and he's scaled, obviously, a huge amount since then. He's done over $125 million in transactions across all types of asset types, and then he started his newest company in 2021, Evoke Capital, and the objective there is to help others achieve financial freedom through real estate investing, much like myself and my team. And Evoke, within 9 months, have amassed and included a portfolio of 300 units, a mobile home park, and 197 lots under contract. And this one, I just wanted to read. This was on your bio here, Pasha. I thought was really interesting. We might just kind of pick at this to start, but he has been Pasha's been involved in a bunch of successful professional ventures. And one of the focuses with his new company, Evoke, is to develop a sustainable community. And with that, he wants to pretty much develop all sorts of things with low-income housing, which includes NGOs and all these sorts of amazing things. So I just wanted to kind of pick at that a little bit. It seems like your mission is pretty tied and pretty tight. So do you just want to kind of start there with your history and what your kind of focus is with this company and what your goals are?
Yeah, sure. Would love to. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I'll start with how I got started in real estate, a little bit of my backstory, and we'll talk about the NGOs and all that and what our mission is here. I'm a son of an immigrant father. I moved here in 1987. My father, being very successful back in Iran, gave up literally everything to come here for his two sons to essentially start fresh. And so I always tell the story that I think I got into real estate. Actually, I know I got into real estate because it was my father's dream. My father had to sacrifice his dream for us. And so growing up, I'd always hear him talk about, oh man, I wish I bought that house, or man, I wish I bought that land. And oh man, I could have bought that for $20,000. Now it's worth $500,000. And so I remember just always hearing that as a child. I'm like, man, I love real estate. And so I always knew that real estate was my end game. Now, obviously, my journey took some zigs and zags until I got here. And that's really kind of how it happened. I am a college dropout, and now I can say I'm proud of that. Back when I did, I was not. I became a professional poker player in about, I think, probably 2006. Following my brother, he became very successful in poker. And that led me into real estate after many, many years of playing poker, just because I realized that real estate was always the end game. But I learned a lot of great things playing poker. So fast forward to now, Evoke Capital, we do that. We do syndications and mostly in mobile home parks. We now actually have 396 units in escrow. It's just kind of like all coming at once, which is great. There's 6 months of dry spell and they just kept coming at us now.
Feast or famine.
Yeah, it really is feast or famine. I'm like, all right, I guess I got to buy that one too, so I'm not complaining. Right. And just to briefly talk about the end game for me is I've had to be self-taught on everything. My father was working at all hours. And so I had to learn everything on my own. Especially outside of college. I wanted to learn. I learned more outside of, high school and college, all by just reading books, going to masterminds, all the information is on the internet. And so that's something that's really important to me is education. And in these low income communities that I find that there's a big lack of education, culture, and empowerment. And so, the end goal, which I'm sure we can talk about later on is to essentially get to the point where I could build my own communities where I do a lot of emotional intelligence, nutrition, financial workshops, all within the apartment complex. not so focused on the bottom line, but really creating a culture of empowerment so people can get ahead. Um, and I think that goes really amiss in our culture. I'm not people try to just gamify it on how much money they make instead of about what kind of impact can you make. And I truly believe that you get to a certain point in life, it's about giving back because it doesn't really matter when you die with the money that you have.
No, that's amazing, and it sounds like what you're aiming to do is kind of essentially help supplement what you'd probably get a conventional education for, whether you like public school education or whatever formal education you get. You don't always get like the soup to nuts wellness education, kind of like what you're talking about, right? They kind of stop you after algebra class or science class, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what you get, but you don't really talk about, how you do the adult stuff or how you should be taking care of your body more at a high level, these types of things. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it so fascinating to me that most people, and I'm 37, but a lot of people my age that I talk to don't have a ton of financial literacy outside of like the real estate world because we're already in this world and everyone already kind of knows why we're doing it. But no one is taught about, compound interest or investing and IRRs and all these things. And so how are they supposed to get ahead? And so that's something that really sticks out to me.
Yeah, I mean, we could we could probably dive into this topic for an hour, right?
Right.
But I think it's almost there's no aim for that in an education system because it doesn't really help people professionally, and that's almost what the education system is meant to do in a way, right? It's supposed to help you start your career essentially. It helps educate you and get you out to like do the job, whatever. But yeah, it doesn't really help with like the personal lifestyle and all these kind of personal choices you should be making, well before your adulthood, or at least being trained to make. So
Right.
yeah, really interesting. How, I guess, on your progress of this, what does it look like when you talk about this with your team and everything? Um, is it something you're implementing currently, or is it something you're still working on and kind of progressing through and developing?
Okay, so this is a great question. I think I want to go back to something that I always give not really a metaphor, but essentially about expanding your time horizons. That if I can look at my life and expand it out into like a 10-year life horizon, this is how I always view 10-year chunks at a time. And so for me, actually, the reason why I got into multifamily and why I got into mobile home parks and more low income outside of the economics of, there's the wealth disparities is growing and growing. And so we need to be positioned for that. Secondly, is that, these communities I'm going to build are going to be down like 5 years in the line, down the line. And I want to self fund it because I've tried going the LIHTC route, that government grants, and it's just not really cost effective. And it actually, in my opinion, doesn't really serve low income communities. It actually serves like more of a middle to low income bracket with like new housing. So not a lot of people can get into there. So I think there's this massive need for this. And so I said, okay, let me just go buy as much low income communities as I can now, understand the systems, understand the needs of them, and then position myself to know how to do it. In addition to that, there is a company that I've been in talks with called Apartment Life. They're a nonprofit organization, and they do exactly this. I don't think they do it to the scale that I want, um, but they do this. And so we have been in contact in one of my apartment complexes in Wichita. We are going to implement this. I was just waiting to get our occupancy up and really, we closed on it earlier this year. So we're waiting to turn it around before we implement it. So it's going to happen here shortly.
So, in talking with this company, I'm sure you learned, a trick or two, kind of what they've been involved in at this stage. They might be, a couple of steps ahead. What are some mechanics that kind of were different or you weren't expecting that maybe there's some, I guess,
Hmm.
variable that comes into play that you didn't consider when, visions are great, but a good vision essentially to me is like asking a good question, but then you got to, 10-year goal, figure out the answer, right? So
Yeah.
what kind of piece was missing that you didn't realize you had to kind of use the hurdle?
What I really like that what they do is okay, so we both had a really similar vision about community, about how we want to build community. You always want to live somewhere where you know your neighbors and you can count on each other and whatnot, right? The thing that I really like that what they do is that they're more like a liaison. It's like they have someone that lives there and they go introduce themselves to anyone who moves in and just say, hey, if you need anything, let me know. I'm here for you. and they try to set more community events together. What I find lacking as of right now is probably more on the emotional intelligence side or a lot of training side, which is fine, right? I don't think they're positioned that way. But so when I enact my vision 5 years from now, there's going to be a lot more of education, a lot more of empowerment, a lot more of, hey, you can go accomplish all your goals and settings and dreams and whatnot.
And so I guess kind of turning it back to the original thing, that I guess to me it sounds like was driven because you pretty much to some level had that same experience where you kind of had to figure that out on your own type of ness, right? So um without going too far into structure versus letting people figure things out on their own, what kind of box are you going to draw around this to help facilitate this so people don't have to, learn from their mistakes like you quote unquote had to, but also give them the freedom to kind of go about this. I know these might be tricky questions, but you got me curious, man. So
No, this is great. Let's go down this road. I love it. This
yeah,
is actually a great question, but I'm 100% the one person to say, go make mistakes. Like
sure.
I did. I have a funny story is when I first got into real estate, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I wanted to be in real estate. So I saw a house in a neighborhood that I thought was good. And I just walked up to the for sale sign and I just rang the doorbell and said, hey, I want to buy your house. And they're like, all right, you have to talk to my realtor. I'm like, realtor? And they're like, well, do you have money? Money? What are you talking about?
It's your house, right?
Yeah. But you just learn from the mistake. You're like, oh, I need a realtor. So then I got a realtor. Then they explained to me, and then it was just one thing after another. You have to. That's how I've always lived my life. Um, but to create the structure around this, I think I think everybody naturally wants to get ahead, right? I don't think there's a human in the world that says, you know what, I'm just complacent where I'm at all. Especially in low income communities, I think everyone wants to get ahead. But sometimes it's just that one little piece of information, that one little tweak, that one environment of, you know what, you can do it. So if you have the subconscious training of like always hearing that, hey, you can do it, hey, you can do it, even from childhood, you're going to carry that along with you, right? We could say that at least what I believe is that we're just a set of patterns reinforced time and time again, right? We have 90% of our habits from the age 7, and we just reinforce those same things over and over again. But if we can build a community wherein the children in that community are being empowered and learning things and growing and having free tutorship at these communities, then man, imagine how far they can go. Imagine the mental conversations they could have, the internal conversations they could have with themselves in comparison to environments where you can't do anything, you can't get ahead, and you have these dead end jobs. Again, that's a generalization. Everything's a little bit skewed. But my mission is very clear to me that I think education and empowerment are vital to people's success and getting ahead and having the confidence in themselves.
Yeah, it's speaking of generalities, I'll get into one a little bit, I guess, and keep don't quote me, I guess, but I guess well, my fiance, she is a teacher. I'm here in New York. She's a teacher in Lower Harlem, so she sees some communities where there is kind of this common mindset where it's a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset, and that to some effect comes from literally having less,
Yep.
oftentimes compared to most. So to get people out of that mindset to find abundance where there might not be, which is pretty much what you're talking about. If you have the right tools, you can find the right catalyst to do these things to just improve on your life versus your ancestors' lives, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera. It can be, empowering to be able to do that. So yeah, really commend you for that. So really, really interesting stuff. I don't know if we need to do the entire show on that because it's like a crazy meta topic that you could pretty much devolve into like an
That's true.
entire hour episode. But yeah, really interesting to hear I guess the vision of everything. So yeah, excited to kind of see your progress on that. But I guess Pasha, we'll kind of trail it back into the multifamily stuff. Um, so in these low income communities that you're looking to target, mobile home parks often, you mentioned not LIHTC, low income housing tax credit communities. Can you kind of explain the hurdles you found there, why that doesn't really make sense for you guys? And I guess we'll get more into the business side of things. What are you really looking for to accomplish these goals that you were mentioning? And maybe why is that not one of the channels?
Light tech for me it's just slow. Like first thing is foremost is I have ADD. Like, one thing that I really No, I understand how my brain operates. Light tech process is so incredibly slow, and it doesn't hit the target market that I want. Secondly, I've been in real estate development for a long time. I've developed a bunch of land up construction here in LA, and it's boring and it's slow and I hate it. And I don't like it. I like faster results and I like cash flow. And so to me, that just didn't fit what I wanted to do. And it didn't bring me enough joy to want to do that route. Plus, I don't think it was catering to the real market that I want to end up hitting. Right. And so that's why I just chose not to go down that route. And that's why I felt a big resistance for it. And the communities that we're in now, they're not like super low income. They're more of the C class properties. And, I think a lot of people have a stigma on like low income or C class properties in C areas. But if you get the right tenants, they're all great. They're really grateful. If you treat them with superior customer service and superior product, they're going to treat your product, which is your units, in a superior way. I've never ever really been attracted to going to luxury market or A or B properties. I've always been attracted to going to C properties, doing it better than everybody else. And I've always hit top of market rents and had top market models. And I've always had really, really good tenants. Obviously, you have some bad apples. And now that I've scaled up, we have some people here and there, and one person burns down a duplex or, things like that. But it's very rare and far between. And if you have the right teams in place, it's really not that much of a bother at all.
Yeah, so I think we might have found our next kind of conversation piece here because that is, I would say, relatively contrarian compared to most people's, shift in opinion these days. You talk to a lot of people, are moving from kind of the C class assets to the Bs and maybe even the As if they can, pull that off. Just because they see the valuations going up and the Bs aren't looking too much more expensive than the Cs right now and these types of things. Um, so it's interesting to hear that take. And you mentioned, and I think you're right. It's just a little bit more effort on getting the right tenants in and maybe a little bit more expensive just because of maybe the property is a little bit older or these types of things economically. But I think you're right. So why do you think in this climate, in this economic climate where I guess where I'm saying most people think that it might be better to move to C is that you are still set on the C class as being a good risk reward
Oh yeah.
for investing.
First things, coming from a poker background, there's a thing called game selection, right? And so when you're deciding which route to go, for me, the C class properties in the C areas or even D class properties in C areas, because I don't mind a big fixer upper, is game selection. For me, I'm getting higher yields, and B, I'm getting really good returns. And secondly, on a macro scale, I like to think of 10-year spans, right? I think I mentioned earlier about expanded time horizons. For me, they're not building enough low income housing to meet the demand. And secondly, it's a fact, the poorer are getting poorer and richer are getting richer. So the disparity is becoming more and more. There's going to become more and more of a need for low income housing, 2 years, 5 years, 10, 20 years from down the line. And I'm positioning myself to take advantage of that. Also, at the same time, giving back and helping more than anybody else that I think is in the low income community. Well, that's too generalized. I'm sure there's a ton of people out there that are giving back in a big way. So to me, it was a no brainer, higher yields. And on a macro level, I'm positioning myself to take advantage of what's happening.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe that's the answer. Then you talk to, well, I syndicate, and a lot of other syndicators I talk to, all of their underwriting, their pro formas are underwritten for 3 to 5, maybe 7 year holds. Seems to be, most commonly, under 7 years, usually about a 5 year hold. If you talk about a 10 year, your options can kind of open up quite a bit. It's just tougher to make returns sometimes on these deals when people need to essentially keep transacting to keep their investors employed in deals, basically. But you talk about 10 years, which I mean, we try to find deals which go for longer horizons, like yourself. That's when the kind of forward planning, like you're talking about, can make sense, right? Where you don't mind basically owning that property for longer and setting yourself up for either you can refi out of it or just hold it for that next kind of whatever market shift takes place in the next 5 to 7 years instead of kind of flipping it in 3 to 5. So it sounds
Mhm.
like maybe that's where the advantage is. So how do you typically pull off, structuring a deal so that you can hold it for kind of longer than that 5 to 7 year hold?
Yeah. So to be really clear and candid, that every property up until this time has been, I purchased on my own. Okay. So I am just starting to syndicate just now because, I don't want to turn off deal flow, and I've set up a team and I've set up, a pipeline of deal, and I just don't want it to stop. That goes along with the lines of, uh, getting as many assets as I can right now, because I just see where the macro economy is going. So it just falls in line. Secondly, back to our original statement is, again, I have so many people around me that have money, they're sitting in savings, and I feel like I have to syndicate to help them truly and honestly, because some of the deals that I'm getting into, I wish they could be part of it up until this point. So just growing my friends' money really is something really important for me. And I try to teach financial literacy to everyone around me. Um, and so I'm doing a little bit of a different model where I'll do essentially we're going to do a long-term hold, but in our first syndications, we're just going to take an upfront acquisition fee, a 7% pref, and then everything's going to go back to the investors until I'm basically pay back the principal 100%. And then we'll go to a 50-50 split in perpetuity forever. So, they have to be in line with the long-term planning of what I'm doing. And so what I do try to educate is that the real money is made after you're paid back whole, and then that you're just straight 100% ROI, and you're able to refi every few years in these homes. And it's lifelong money. Like, to me, it's a no-brainer, and it's insane.
Yeah, I think there can be a culture of, I guess it's two-sided coin. There can be a culture of, flipping a deal too early when maybe the market, like right now, is going pretty high and it seems attractive to advertise that your deal popped and was more than a 2x multiple in 3 years, what have you. That could be a great story, and it makes your investors real happy. But there's also a lot to be said when you just hold these legacy assets like you're talking about, where if it's a no-brainer juicy asset and you just believe in that area, that community for essentially a lifetime, it's hard to not hold on to something like that, in my opinion. So that's what we look for too. So
Yeah, exactly. And I get it. Like, when you're a syndicator, it's much easier and probably better to just flip it. I mean, you're dealing with investors. It's like a marriage for a really long time.
yeah.
And anyone who doesn't syndicate doesn't understand, like, it could be difficult time. You're dealing with like so many different personalities, and so many of their needs, it might fluctuate. So, that's why I'm trying to do this. And we'll have like a buyout clause, I'm sure. And, at least right now for the first few deals, it's all like really close friends of mine that are doing it. But later on, as I open it up later on, the structure might change. But that's really like the wealthiest people I've ever met in real estate. The bosses of bosses, they've all kept the properties. They don't look for the short-term run. They don't look for the short-term gain. They just held on to all the properties, and they started to recycle their money into other properties. And it just started becoming a snowball effect, right? And so when you're able to get appreciation on multiple assets, then you could essentially double that again in 5 years, tax free. So those are the guys who really made it, and that's what I'm just trying to model here.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. There's something to be said when you have that balance sheet and you don't have to make a sale or 1031 into something to get to the next level, quote unquote. If you can just basically own a few really good deals and then only make decisions when the market is most ripe to make them, type of thing, you can
Right.
make only 2 or 3 big moves and kind of like the Warren Buffett-esque and move it, just make a couple good ones and just sit on it forever, right?
Exactly.
It's kind of sometimes more convoluted than it has to be, in my
Right.
opinion. So yeah, really interesting to hear that take. So getting into, I guess, investment thesis a little bit deeper. What you're looking at now, is it market specific? Are you looking at a bunch of different areas? You mentioned you're in Cali, I think you said, right? So
Mhm.
I assume you're probably not out there necessarily. So where are you looking these days?
Anywhere but California.
How did I know? I'm
Anywhere
in New
but
York, so I feel you.
or New York, anywhere but New York or
Yeah.
California. The returns and the yields are so high, and it's so it's so tenant friendly as well too, which isn't a horrible thing. Like, I'm not against that, but they do make it very difficult when you do have a really bad tenant. And so right now I'm looking anywhere in the Midwest. We have one in Arizona, one in Ohio, one and most of my properties are in Kansas. I have in Alabama, really anywhere. Um, and because when you're in mobile home parks, it's a little different. It's not as much maintenance and you don't really need much if when you are able to position it correctly. Right. And so I'm very lucky to have a very strong support team that can handle all the heavy lifting. And for that, so that I can really look anywhere at this point.
And you mentioned that support team. We kind of touched on it before we hit record. We kind of pinned you more as the visionary, and we were talking, visionary integrator type of thing. I mentioned I was more integrator style, and my partner is a visionary. So how do you kind of keep it all together? I'm sure you have a nice team fleshed out that handles more of the detail oriented tasks, but how do you kind of manage all of that going on at once? Multiple properties, all these things. What are you doing to stay on task? But also, I mean, you have such a high level vision. Seems like you're pretty well defined. So how do you stay in the clouds, but also make sure the business isn't running itself dry at the bottom there? So
Right. I mean, there's a lot of ways here that I have. I mean, we could talk about the minute details. Like I journal every single day. I have two business coaches. One is real estate specific. One is overall to keep me very much. I'm like if you're like in a bowling alley, I have to have the guards up because I would want to go in every other direction. Um, and it's really just always visualizing. I'm always journaling. I always know where I'm at. I always make graphs. I I know where I have a checklist always. Every single day I'm going over and combing through, hey, what needs to get done and how to quarterback it and who has what responsibilities. So nothing goes amiss. And that's really how we do it. And we just want to execute on a high level. Like, here's the plan. Let's just execute and let's just go do it.
So here's one for you. You mentioned you had a real estate coach and just a general business coach. Um, I've done similar, have similar, where you kind of have, a broader range kind of group, and then a more niched one. Is there any conflicting advice that goes on in that? Because sometimes with me, you can almost, when you're in a niche, it can be tunnel vision to a certain extent,
Hmm.
right? Because a
Yeah.
certain coach knows, very good at a one way of doing things, but not necessarily experience in all, broader spectrum. So it's kind of, master of all trades, jack of all trades, master of none, if you will. So is there any kind of conflicting advice that you've gotten, or some big decisions that you kind of have gotten surprising answers between the two parties, or anything like that that you can kind of think of?
I wouldn't say there wasn't anything that stuck out. I mean, I think both coaches have a little bit of a different way to approach something, but they usually give pretty sound advice. And really big credit to both of my coaches. They're really strong. They're both incredibly successful themselves. So they give really sound advice. So one coach gives one feedback here, other coach gives other feedback here. It's usually because I'm so crystal clear on my vision and what I'm creating that I don't think there is any difference of opinion on how to do it. It's usually in the same thread, but maybe a different approach.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to what I was saying way back at the beginning of the show. If you ask the correct question, you just got to figure out the answer, which is the hard part, right? So
Right, exactly. Absolutely. It's
that's
so
what a couple
true.
of coaches will do for you, though, right? So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting.
You know, oh,
No,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut
no,
you off. I think it comes to it's for me, it's uh, a lot about coming to like how to be relentless, right? So one thing that I would say, I've always like in my poker background, I was very concerned. I'm a more of a conservative player. I'm more of a conservative real estate investor as well too. My numbers have to really check out. One thing though in poker that you learn is that you have to be very aggressive. Once you decide your niche or you decide which strategy you're going to employ, go by the math, but be very aggressive, right? So, like in poker, if you just sit on the sidelines, you're going to lose no matter what. You're guaranteed to lose. You have to learn how to be aggressive. And so, I really take that to heart. Of like, once I find something or find a niche, I attack it relentlessly. Like, especially with my flipping or my land development deals, I don't really know anything about land development, but I saw an opportunity and I attacked it, and it paid off in dividends. But you just got to follow the math, and if the math checks out over and over again, go and attack it and go attack it really hard. And so to relate it back to the coaches, they know what my vision is. They know the numbers I'm trying to hit, and it's a common goal. So as long as the math checks out, they're having me attack it at full speed.
yeah, and I love the poker analogy. It's kind of essentially what you're saying is, if you eliminate the risk because you know a strategy, then just go 100% with that strategy, right? So
Yeah.
you kind of eliminate a lot of the risk that way, and then you can just really commit and you go with conviction and you hold on, right? So
Yeah, it's a game. It's a game of making consistent, good decisions over the long run. Because sometimes your decisions don't really work out in the short term, especially in poker, because just the mathematical odds, and sometimes the hits against you, and good luck, bad luck, whatever. But if you make consistently good decisions over the long term, you're just going to hit some really amazing like properties or numbers. And then to the reference point that it was feast or famine earlier, 6 months I had nothing. I was beating my head over like the wall. And now I have 5, and they all came in within about a month and a half span, you know?
yeah, so we're kind of eking into this, you know, I guess mental rigidity and all the kind of mental fortitude questions that I ask in my 5 key questions. So
Mhm.
unless you had a piece that you wanted to share about, the low income housing or any of your mission, if you had any last words, otherwise I'd love to get into these 5 key questions, Pasha.
No, I'm good.
So the first one here is if you could only pick one trait that explains your success, what is that trait and why?
I never gave up. And that's really it. I'll say I'm not the most intelligent person in the world. I'm not super detail oriented, but I do know that, hey, there's other people that are, and to team up with them. And so it's about being relentless. And I'm not saying that like in the raw way. It's just like, but just keep going and keep trying and keep it being okay to fail. I know that everyone says that, and I try not to be like a broken record. And then secondly, one thing that I think everyone talks about this, but this is my twist on it. When you have a very crystal clear vision, no matter what, because I think everyone writes goals, especially in this community of real estate, everyone writes goals. They know what they want. But man, if you have the most crystal clear vision and it's like a no matter what that you have to accomplish, you will grow into that person. Because what happens, Dave, is that when you say, hey, I want to make $10 million or something, you start, if you train yourself every single day to think that way, you start to see opportunities differently. You start to go into different doors that you normally wouldn't. You would start different conversations, or you would do something differently. And those little things add up, they compound over time.
Yeah, I think it's the correct effect. The Bader-Meinhof effect. It's like when you buy a new car and then you see that same car literally everywhere around you.
Exactly.
It was always in your subconscious. They were always out there, but it didn't light up your brain until you actually knew it
Yep.
existed, right? So you don't
Mhm.
see opportunities out there until you want to kind of will it yourself. It's probably a more uh, gray area, kind of comparison in that regard. But if you want to just do something, make it clear in your head and write it down every day, see it every day, and then it'll kind of
Exactly.
compound from there. So couldn't agree
Exactly.
more. And then the second one here is what is the most uncharacteristic thing you have done in your business and why did you do it?
So this one's very easy for me to answer. I got into a pretty much a really bad deal. And so I got into a bad deal. I'm not going to go into details. And the other person didn't really, my partner at the time, didn't do it on purpose, but got us into a bad deal. And I just essentially just trusted kind of blindly and let him kind of handle the rate. I have other businesses and I got really busy and inundated with a lot of things. And I said, well, you know what? This guy's been in real estate for a long time. Let him just do his thing. And I remember saying at one point, like, hey, go ahead and handle it. I know you got it. And I just kind of stepped back. And man, I paid for it for so long because that person couldn't really kind of afford it. So then I had to pick it up. It was a 4-year ordeal on a development deal that went really south really quickly. So, you know, don't blindly trust someone and think they absolutely know everything. Go back to the fundamentals, do your math, do your homework, educate yourself, and then make it an informed decision.
And then I guess that may eke into this next question, but can you name a time where you felt like you weren't going to end up successful and how did you overcome that fear?
Oh man, there was so many times in poker where, you just run bad for months and you just lose and you go broke or you almost go broke and you have to get a loan or there was a lot of ups and downs and you really had to create a Teflon like armor and just say, you have to learn how to be optimistic, and just say, hey, the next hand's going to turn around. Hey, this month is going to turn around. So there was a lot of times that really, I think, set me up for success. And in the real estate game, honestly, I've never really felt like wasn't going to be unsuccessful, even in my bad deal, or I didn't really make it a much of money when I first started out, I always knew 100% of the time I was going to make this.
No, I love that. And pretty much the flip of that, Pasha. Can you name a time where something in your business went perfectly, and what did you do to make that a reality?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a tricky question because I don't think I give myself enough credit. At least my wife says I never do. Because
Most of us don't oftentimes. Yeah.
you know, and so I think things could always be optimized and be better. I think one thing that was my saving grace is that when I started, I never let my emotions get in the way. I always stuck to the math. I was always very conservative, at least in the beginning of my career. So that way I could get the education and get the experience to make different decisions. But in the beginning, it was strictly math. It was strictly conservative math. And I just was patient enough to find the right house to buy at the auction. And when I did, I made every mistake in the world, but I still made about $3,000. And it was because I bought it correctly. And I didn't just want to buy a house just to say I was doing it.
And then last one here. What have you been focusing on lately to improve yourself or your business?
I think the number one thing that I've been doing really differently this year is I built a team around me. I used to be a big lone wolf in all my real estate deals, but I really learned to really scale and get into the vision that I want to create, to have a team around me, a bunch of mentors around me as well. And secondly is my health. We look at real estate as this thing that we're going to do for ourselves later on so we can retire and have cash flow. And I want to look at my life the same way. So when I do a lot of these biohacking, I do the cold plunge every single day. I take a bunch of supplements, but I look at my life the same way. I'm going to do everything I can today to make sure that when I'm older, around 80, 90, 100 years old, that I'm still feeling young and vibrant and, I'm mentally all there still. So just looking at your life at the expanded time horizon as well.
Yeah, man, we covered a gauntlet, it feels like today. I appreciate
Yeah.
you going through the wickets with me because I feel like I dragged you all over the place. But yeah, no, I love the mission. I love what
Thank
you're
you.
doing and working on it. It sounds like it's gonna be easy because, like you mentioned on the second question there, once you have it kind of figured out what you want to do, it's just a matter of acting on it. So putting in the reps seems like an easy thing for you to do. So can't wait to see you kind of continue your path here. And just for the listener, if you want to drop, your website or whatever, how to contact you, just go right ahead. Really
Sure.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it. You could just look for Pasha Esfandiary on LinkedIn, or you could just go to evokecapital.net and you can connect with me there.
Thanks again so much, Pasha.
I appreciate it, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the show. I don't take your time and attention for granted and appreciate that you would spend it with me. If you enjoyed this show or any of my previous shows, it would be a huge help if you would rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcasting service, or even just share the episode with a friend. And if you'd like help from me or would like to talk about real estate investing further, feel free to visit the show notes for more information, or you can visit davidtravis.com.